Hi everyone, in this video I want to get into a rhythmic concept that's called implied metric modulation, since it's a wicked sounding trick that you can use to create spicy fills through to mind-bending prog beats and anything in between. Broadly speaking, metric modulation is just a fancy way of saying changing the pulse or meter, so anything from a simple tempo change to going from one time signature to another, to changing feel from straight to swung, all of these things could be considered metric modulation. But what I'm talking about today is implied metric modulation, which is where it seems like there's a change of rhythm, tempo, time signature, or feel, but in actual fact it's a bit of an illusion, and underneath what you're hearing, the original pulse remains unchanged. So to demonstrate what I'm talking about, I'm going to show you guys a really quick and blunt example. Musically, it's pretty rubbish. Really the only point of this is to show you really clearly what I'm talking about. So you hear in the beginning a basic rock beat. About the halfway mark, you'll hear the hi-hats start to become really syncopated. And then for the final repeat, it's going to feel like everything has abruptly changed tempo as far as the drums go. It's going to feel strange against the guitars. And then when the end kicks in, it's going to feel like you're kind of just left hanging. So you'll see what I mean when I hit play. So let's do that right now. So hopefully you hear what I'm talking about there. In the beginning, the hi-hat's hitting every 4/16 notes, that's every quarter note. At the halfway point, what happens is that the hi-hat starts hitting every 3/16 notes, so the hits are a little bit more closely spaced. And then for the final repeat, when the implied metric modulation happens, the kick and the snare start marking a new downbeat and backbeat that's related to this new hi-hat pattern. And it feels like it's slowed down, like you're somehow marking a new pulse, but you're not. The actual original beat is still going, and if you were to rewind and play that again and just listen to the guitar, it's just keeping that da-dun-dun-dun-da-dun-dun-dun 4/4 feel throughout. So with that clunky example out of the way, let's listen to how you could use implied metric modulation in a more proggy, dare I say it, djenty context. There's a lot of quite complicated rhythmic things going on in this, including implied metric modulation. So let's give it a listen and see if you can pick out when the implied metric modulation happens and when it switches back out again. Alright, so that's a whole other world when compared to the first clip. Let's see if we can break down what's going on, and what I'll do is I'll pull up the actual piano roll so you can see the MIDI that I programmed here. If we look at just the first repetition, this is the kind of core form of the beat where the time is being counted in straight quarter notes. So again, you've got 4/16 notes per pulse. So I'll play it to you one more time so you can hear what I mean. You get the idea. So that's the first 4 bars, and up on this this stack symbol up here, it's kind of alternating between hard and soft hits to mark out the quarter note pulse. Then at the top of the next repetition, that first bar, this time has a bit of a fill going on, and it's partly because the guitar riff isn't just looping every 8 bars, it's kind of got a slightly different device at each repeat. So what I've done is I've used the fill to kind of disorient a little bit, and that's going to be a word that we're going to come back to quite a lot through this tutorial. There's a bit of disorienting fill, and then to kind of set up for the concept that things are about to change, start making it so the hands are following the kick pattern instead of keeping time. So we still feel like we're in 4/4, the backbeat's still in the same place, but now we've got the dun 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 being played on the cymbal at the same time as the kick drum. So this is what that sounds like. So that's just for a little brief period of time. Then things start getting kind of a bit more mad. Again, I'm using a 16th note fill to kind of disorient the listener. But now when we come out of the fill, I'm going to borrow the same device that I used in that first really clunky example, where the kick and snare pattern is going to stay the same, but the right hand on the cymbal, this time played on an X hat, starts marking out every 3 16th notes instead of every 4. So at this point, it's going to get quite difficult to drum along to this if you're a drummer. This is definitely quite an advanced technique for drummers to play. But here we're beginning to set up this feeling like something's about to change. And you'll notice, even though the snares are in more or less the same position, in fact, sorry, they are in the same position as before, they start to feel like they're not really syncing up because your ear's latching onto that new hi-hat. But we haven't really established a new feel altogether. It just all feels a bit syncopated. Let's listen to this section again. So it's just a tiny little bit there, but what it does is it serves to set up for the implied metric modulation, which is the bit that comes next, where we take that new rhythm established on the X hats. I think it moves over to a left china at that point, the way I've programmed it. But now we start moving the snares as well. So the snares are going to hit on this new perceived backbeat, and it's going to feel like everything has suddenly kind of, I guess feel like it's sped up. It definitely feels like it's changed to a new feel. It's gone into like this swung kind of triplet vibe. So this is what that sounds like. So this feels completely different to the beginning. Let's just go back to the beginning. And then with the implied metric modulation. So, at its core, you can see how we've managed to go from the quarter note feel to this swung triplet feel by kind of disorienting the listener a little bit. Again, this would be quite tricky to drum along to if you actually wanted to do it. So one other thing which I've done to try and make this feel like it actually has changed tempo is I've put a heavy crash accent here, halfway through bar 34. Now, in our original tempo, that's not a downbeat. However, with this new implied meter on top, that feels like a resolution point. And by putting the crashes there, it kind of solidifies in the listener's mind that that is where the 1 is, but it's not. It's beat 3 of bar 34. So to show you what's going on here with the reference point of the original tempo, which is still continuing underneath all of this, the original pulse hasn't changed. We haven't changed tempo, we haven't changed time signature. This is all an illusion on top of the core pulse that we started out with. I'm going to play you this same kind of section from once the metric modulation has started happening. I'm going to leave the click track in there so that you can hear it. And it's going to feel like the click has got nothing to do with the music, but if you muted the drums, you'd hear that the click track is just exactly the same as it's been throughout. And I left it rolling towards the end there so you could just hear that it does all resolve back into the click track feeling like it's in time. So, even having programmed this and even having a good knowledge of implied metric modulation, it's almost impossible to not get sucked into this illusion and hear it like the actual feel has changed. And that's why it's so difficult to execute as a drummer, because a drummer essentially has to be able to play this with confidence, but be able to keep the original pulse going on in their heads, because otherwise they're just going to get lost. So let's break this down to a few guidelines. And I think number one, probably the most important thing that I want to say is that implied metric modulation it's cool, but it's a rhythmic technique that's not going to be appropriate most of the time. It's something which is best used sparsely for effect and definitely gets really old, boring, disorienting, uninteresting if overdone. And it's super geeky music, it's super geeky musician stuff, so don't expect to be able to appeal to a wide audience if you're doing this kind of stuff all the time. I'd say probably the prime opportunities to use it are when you've got something which has a kind of polyrhythmic feel to it. If you've got a riff that's like a 3 against 4 kind of feel, or it could be 5s. There's no reason that it just has to be like 3 16th notes that you're using here. It could be 5s, 7s, 11s. It can go completely nuts if you wanted to. But if you're playing a polyrhythmic part already, it's really easy because all you need to do is to put the focus away from the kind of main pulse onto the other rhythm in the polyrhythm, instead of just trying to impose this completely arbitrary new tempo over the top of what you're playing. So number 2 would be that a really good way of getting into a metric modulation is to kind of hint at what's about to happen before it happens completely. And by saying that, I'm referring to what I was doing with the hi-hat in both examples, where it starts to syncopate without the whole implied metric modulation actually occurring. And if you can foreshadow this earlier in the song, like if that section appears earlier in the song and you want to foreshadow it with a bit of that syncopation, but not actually do the modulation, you get extra brownie points too. That's just good songwriting. And number 3 would be that the use of a disorienting fill can act a bit like a smokescreen for the listener to kind of momentarily lose their place in the bar. And that means that when you come in with the modulated version, it actually feels like a resolution rather than an abrupt gear change. So what do I mean by disorienting? I guess I mean fills that have a constant rate of notes to them without very many gaps. This is important because if you've got just constant 8ths or 16ths, it can become a lot easier to disguise the downbeat because you're not accenting it in the same way. You've just got this constant stream of notes, and it makes it possible for the listener to kind of shift gear. And what else would it add to disorienting? I guess if you could add some extra accents into the fill, bonus points if you can give some accents which again are hinting at the new feel that's coming up. So, if you're doing something like we've done here where it's a quarter note feel going to a triplet feel, you could throw in, you could kind of group the fill so it's grouped in 3s or something like that, so that it's actually kind of starting to build that feeling. And then finally, if you can actually make the fill carry over the bar line, that's excellent for disorienting people. And it sounds cool a lot of the time, I think. If the fill kind of obscures where the 1 is, the downbeat, then again, you're kind of priming the listener for this new thing that's about to happen to feel like they've just latched on to home again, but you've actually shifted it to a new tempo entirely. And once you're done implying the modulated meter, you can use the exact same technique of a disorienting fill to get back out again and back to your original pulse. So one word of caution is that programming implied metric modulations or other advanced rhythmic figures is so easy when you're just clicking it in on a piano roll, but the complete opposite is true for the drummers that actually have to play this stuff. It's incredibly difficult to pull these kinds of parts off. And if you start throwing loads of stuff like this into your songs and then giving them to your drummer to learn, he's probably going to hate your guts. There are loads of drummers out there that have made their names around their ability to play anything, including all these kinds of really advanced rhythmic concepts. Guys like Virgil Donati, Gavin Harrison, Vinny Colaiuta, Chris Coleman, Benny Greb, just to name a few. I mean, there's quite a few of them out there doing it. And I guess if you've got one of those guys in your bands, then just go nuts, basically. So if you want to hear some examples of implied metric modulation being used in actual songs, I can think of a few examples off the top of my head. The intro riff to Taste My Fist by Freak Kitchen. That's a really great, simple example. It's a great riff, and it kind of starts in triplet time and then shifts to straight and then back again, and it keeps kind of switching between the two. It's super easy to catch on to what's happening there. Another example would be the song Icarus Lives by Periphery. Around the 3-minute mark, I think. I've made a note about it here. Yeah, about 3 minutes into Icarus Lives by Periphery, they take the riff, which is a polyrhythm. It's like a 5/4 thing. That and just momentarily, it starts being accented in the 5s. So you get that. So that's another example that happens really briefly, and it's really just for a kind of quick effect, and then it's out again. Another cool song could be Nocturne by Tesseract. In general, that's got some really cool rhythmic concepts going on and manages to sound really groovy at the same time. But specifically around 1:45 minutes, there's like a pre-chorus part, and everything shifts into like a triplet time. And it works well because, like I say, there's a lot of kind of advanced rhythmic stuff happening anyway, so it's not like it's just totally straight song with a truck driver gear change. But that's a really well executed one. There's a song called Singularity by the band Textures. Steph Brox is another of those drummers that just does mind-blowing stuff. That song, it kind of starts implying that everything's based around 5s, like a quintuplet time thing. And he's like building the part up around the guitars, which are playing like a cyclical 5 figure. But then when the beat kicks in, it's straight and it's awesome. It's like in a 4 count. So That's a really good one. And then like the absolute beast that is Planet X's version of the song Alien Hip Hop. That you just need to listen to that all the way through if you've not heard it before. That's with Virgil Donati playing drums, and he basically throws the entire rhythm textbook at that song. If you can listen through the first time you're hearing it and tap a quarter note pulse throughout, then you deserve a medal. And what you should definitely do is check out the intro riff, which kind of, it's going throughout most of the song. When it comes in, it's triplet time. After the guitar solo, which is at like 4 minutes and 20 seconds in, 4:20. I don't know why I did that, that's not like me at all. At about 4:20 in the song, you get this change to a straight feel. And suddenly the riff feels actually a lot more predictable. And he's doing mental stuff with it throughout the song. It's definitely worth a listen. So that's it for now. I hope you found this video entertaining and informative. If there are any other examples of implied metric modulation that you like and that you've heard in songs, then definitely post them in the comments below. I'm sure people would love to hear them, myself included. And yeah, just have fun programming, and I'll see you next time.